Before you dismiss mystical experiences as imagination or wishful thinking, let me share what happened to Joel Goldsmith one quiet evening in 1928. This revelation would transform not only his life but thousands of others who discovered the profound truth he uncovered that night. That evening, alone in his room, Joel experienced something beyond ordinary consciousness. A presence filled his awareness, bringing with it an understanding that would challenge everything he believed about healing, God, and human limitation. This wasn't a dream or meditation vision. What he discovered in that moment became the foundation of a healing practice that defied medical explanation. People with terminal diagnoses found themselves completely restored. Business failures turned into unprecedented success through this mystical understanding. The presence whispered secrets that would revolutionize spiritual healing. Joel realized he had touched something that mystics throughout history had discovered but rarely shared openly. This experience would become his life's mission to teach others. The presence that visited Joel that evening whispered a truth so simple yet revolutionary that it would shake the foundations of traditional religious thinking. It revealed that God is not separate from us, waiting to be petitioned, but is the very essence of our being manifesting as individual consciousness. This wasn't mere philosophy or religious doctrine that Joel had studied in books. He felt this truth in every cell of his body. The separation between human and divine dissolved completely, revealing an intimate connection that had always existed but remained hidden from ordinary awareness. From that moment forward, Joel's life became a living demonstration of this mystical principle. Healing flowed through him not because he possessed special powers, but because he had awakened to the divine nature already present within every person who walked the earth. The transformation was immediate and permanent. Joel never again experienced himself as separate from divine consciousness. This mystical union became the source of healing power that would touch thousands of lives across the globe. Joel's mystical experience revealed what he called the infinite way, a path where healing happens not through human effort but through recognition of our divine nature. This wasn't about positive thinking or mental techniques, but about awakening to spiritual reality that exists beyond physical appearances. The presence showed him that every problem, every limitation, every disease exists only in the realm of human belief. When we touch the mystical dimension of consciousness, these appearances dissolve naturally because they have no foundation in spiritual truth or divine reality. This understanding challenged every conventional approach to healing that Joel had previously studied. He discovered that mystical consciousness doesn't fight problems or try to overcome them through willpower. It simply reveals their unreality in divine consciousness. The divine presence within us is already whole, already perfect, already free from every limitation that appears to human sense. Joel learned that healing means recognizing this perfection rather than trying to create it through human effort. What makes Joel's mystical revelation so powerful is its practical application in everyday life. This wasn't an otherworldly experience that left him floating in spiritual clouds, disconnected from human concerns. Instead, it gave him concrete tools for transformation that anyone could learn to use effectively. The mystical state Joel accessed became his normal consciousness through dedicated practice and surrender. He learned to enter this awareness at will, bringing divine perspective to every human challenge. This is the secret that transformed ordinary people into spiritual healers. You don't need special gifts or years of training to access this mystical dimension of consciousness. Joel's method reveals how to touch this healing consciousness right now, in this moment, regardless of your background, education, or current circumstances. The key is understanding that mystical consciousness is not something you achieve, but something you recognize. It's your true nature waiting to be acknowledged and allowed to express through your individual experience. Margaret Stevens had been told by 3 different doctors that her arthritis would confine her to a wheelchair within months. Traditional medicine offered only temporary relief through increasingly stronger medications with devastating side effects that were destroying her digestive system. When Margaret first heard about Joel's mystical approach to healing, she was deeply skeptical. How could spiritual consciousness possibly affect physical conditions that medical science couldn't cure? But desperation and the fear of permanent disability led her to attend one of Joel's healing sessions. During the session, Joel entered that mystical state he had discovered years earlier. Without touching Margaret or even speaking directly to her, he held her in divine consciousness, recognizing her spiritual perfection. Within minutes, the chronic pain that had tormented her for years simply vanished. 3 months later, Margaret was hiking in the mountains with her grandchildren, completely free from arthritis. Her transformation wasn't gradual improvement over time, but instant recognition of her spiritual perfection that dissolved the physical limitation entirely. Robert Chen faced bankruptcy after his construction business collapsed during the economic downturn. Creditors were demanding immediate payment, his family faced losing their home, and every conventional business strategy he had tried failed completely to turn the situation around. Robert discovered Joel's teachings about mystical consciousness affecting material circumstances. Initially, this seemed impossible. How could spiritual awareness influence bank accounts and business contracts? Yet desperation made him willing to try anything, even approaches that seemed impractical. Following Joel's method carefully, Robert learned to enter mystical consciousness before making business decisions. Instead of operating from fear and desperation, he accessed divine wisdom that revealed unexpected solutions and opportunities that his human thinking had completely overlooked. Within 6 months, Robert's business had not only recovered, but expanded beyond his original success. The mystical principle Joel taught him opened doors that human effort alone could never have accessed, creating abundance through divine guidance. Dr. Patricia Williams was a respected surgeon who prided herself on scientific thinking and evidence-based medicine. When patients began asking her about Joel's mystical healing approach, she dismissed it as dangerous superstition that could interfere with proper medical treatment. Her skepticism shattered when her own daughter developed a rare neurological condition that medical science couldn't cure. After exhausting every conventional treatment and consulting specialists worldwide, Patricia reluctantly attended one of Joel's teachings about mystical consciousness. What she witnessed there challenged everything she believed about healing and the nature of reality. Joel demonstrated that mystical awareness could produce tangible physical changes that defied medical explanation. Patricia realized she had been limiting herself to only one dimension of healing. Patricia began integrating Joel's mystical principles with her medical practice. Her patients experienced faster recovery times and more complete healings when she combined surgical skill with mystical consciousness, creating remarkable results. The transformations you've just heard aren't isolated incidents, but examples of thousands who discovered Joel's mystical approach to healing and manifestation. Each person started exactly where you are now, wondering if mystical experiences could really produce practical results in their lives. Joel's method works because it's based on spiritual law rather than human willpower or positive thinking. When you touch mystical consciousness, you're not trying to make something happen through mental effort. You're recognizing what is already true in divine reality. The mystical dimension Joel discovered is available to you right now, in this very moment. It doesn't require years of preparation or special circumstances. It only requires willingness to move beyond conventional thinking into the realm of spiritual reality. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond healing physical conditions, Joel's mystical experience revealed techniques for transforming every area of life. He discovered that the same consciousness that heals bodies also dissolves financial lack, broken relationships, and career limitations that seem impossible to overcome through human effort. The first complementary technique Joel taught is called recognition. This involves identifying yourself with infinite spirit rather than limited human personality. When you recognize your divine nature, external circumstances must align with this higher identity because spiritual law governs all manifestation. Practice recognition by beginning each day with this mystical awareness. I am not human seeking God, but divine consciousness expressing as human form. This shifts your entire experience from limitation to infinite possibility, opening pathways that were previously invisible. This technique alone has transformed thousands of lives when practiced consistently with understanding. Recognition doesn't require you to deny human experience, but to see it from the perspective of divine consciousness expressing through individual form. Joel's second technique addresses the persistent human tendency to judge by appearances and accept surface conditions as ultimate reality. He learned that mystical consciousness sees through what appears to physical senses to underlying spiritual reality that remains unchanged by external circumstances. This practice, called seeing rightly, involves looking beyond what your physical senses report to what divine consciousness reveals. Where you see problems, mystical awareness perceives opportunities for spiritual demonstration. Where others see limitation, you recognize infinite possibility. When facing challenges, pause and ask divine consciousness to reveal the spiritual reality behind appearances. Joel discovered that this mystical perspective dissolves problems at their root, rather than merely managing symptoms or providing temporary relief from difficulties. Seeing rightly transforms your entire relationship with circumstances. Instead of being victim to conditions, you become witness to divine consciousness expressing perfect harmony through apparent discord and limitation. The third technique Joel developed focuses on what he called impersonal love. This isn't emotional affection or human sentiment, but mystical consciousness recognizing divine perfection in everyone and everything, regardless of their behavior or appearance to human sense. Impersonal love sees beyond human personality to the Christ nature present in all beings. This mystical vision dissolves conflicts, heals relationships, and reveals harmony where discord seemed to exist. It's the most powerful relationship transformer Joel ever discovered. Practice impersonal love by silently blessing difficult people with recognition of their divine nature. Joel discovered that this mystical approach transforms relationships more effectively than any human psychology or communication technique because it works at the level of consciousness. When you consistently practice impersonal love, you'll notice that people respond to you differently because you're seeing their spiritual identity rather than their human personality. This creates space for their higher nature to emerge. Joel's fourth technique involves understanding the mystical principle of non-reaction. Instead of being pulled into drama and conflict, mystical consciousness remains anchored in spiritual truth, regardless of outer circumstances or other people's behavior and emotional states. Non-reaction doesn't mean being passive or uncaring about life around you. Rather, it means responding from divine wisdom instead of human emotion. This mystical centeredness allows appropriate action without being controlled by external pressures or other people's energy. When chaos surrounds you, return to mystical awareness of your divine nature. Joel taught that this inner stillness becomes a sanctuary that nothing external can disturb, providing guidance and peace in any situation you might encounter. Non-reaction creates space between you and circumstances, allowing divine consciousness to respond through you rather than reactive human personality. This transforms you from victim to spiritual presence in every situation. Even with these powerful techniques, you may encounter challenges in developing mystical consciousness. Joel himself faced periods when the divine presence seemed distant and healing power appeared to diminish. These experiences are normal parts of spiritual development, not failures. The most common obstacle is trying to use mystical principles as techniques to get something, rather than recognizing what already is. Joel learned that divine consciousness cannot be manipulated, but only surrendered to and recognized as your true nature. When mystical experiences don't come easily, Joel recommended returning to the fundamental recognition of your divine nature. Don't try to make something happen through spiritual effort. Simply acknowledge what is eternally true about your spiritual identity. Remember that mystical consciousness is not an achievement but a recognition. You're not trying to become something you're not, but awakening to what you have always been beneath the surface of human personality and conditioning. Another challenge involves maintaining mystical consciousness in daily activities. It's easier to touch divine awareness in meditation than while dealing with traffic, demanding bosses, or crying children. Yet Joel discovered this integration is where real transformation occurs. Joel learned that mystical consciousness isn't an escape from human experience, but a way of transforming it from within. Divine awareness doesn't require perfect external conditions, but brings perfection to whatever conditions exist in your immediate experience. Practice carrying mystical consciousness into ordinary activities by frequently remembering your divine nature throughout the day. Joel taught that brief moments of recognition are more effective than lengthy meditations followed by unconscious living. The goal isn't to live in a monastery, but to transform everyday life into spiritual practice. Every interaction becomes opportunity to express divine consciousness. Every challenge becomes invitation to demonstrate spiritual truth. Many people struggle with doubt about their mystical experiences. When divine consciousness produces healing or unexpected solutions, the human mind questions whether it was coincidence or imagination. This doubt can block further spiritual development if not addressed properly. Joel learned to trust mystical experiences even when they couldn't be explained rationally. Divine consciousness operates beyond human logic and doesn't require intellectual understanding to be effective. Faith in spiritual reality deepens through experience, not explanation. Document your experiences with mystical consciousness, noting both dramatic and subtle changes in your life circumstances. Joel found that keeping records helps overcome doubt and builds confidence in divine guidance and healing power working through you. Don't expect others to understand or validate your mystical experiences. Joel discovered that spiritual awakening often creates temporary separation from those who haven't had similar experiences, but this resolves as love and understanding replace judgment. The greatest challenge in mystical development is consistency. Joel observed that people often experience profound divine consciousness initially, then struggle to maintain this awareness over time as old patterns of thinking and reacting reassert themselves.
He discovered that mystical consciousness isn't achieved once and kept forever like a college degree. It must be cultivated daily through recognition, practice, and surrender to divine guidance. Like physical fitness, spiritual awareness requires ongoing attention and commitment.
Create daily practices that reconnect you with mystical consciousness. Joel recommended starting each morning with recognition of your divine nature and ending each evening with gratitude for divine guidance throughout the day, regardless of how successful you felt. Consistency in small practices creates foundation for major spiritual breakthroughs. Joel found that students who maintained simple daily recognition often experienced more profound transformation than those who sought dramatic mystical experiences. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? After years of developing mystical consciousness, Joel began applying these principles to increasingly complex situations. He discovered that divine awareness could transform not just individual problems, but entire communities and organizations when properly understood and applied. One advanced application involves bringing mystical consciousness to social and environmental challenges. Joel learned that when groups of people unite in divine awareness, they can influence collective consciousness and create positive change on scales far beyond individual transformation. This doesn't mean trying to force outcomes through spiritual manipulation or imposing your will on others. Instead, it involves holding collective situations in divine consciousness, allowing spiritual truth to transform circumstances through natural unfoldment of divine order. Joel witnessed remarkable transformations in communities where groups practiced mystical consciousness together. Crime rates decreased, economic conditions improved, and social harmony increased as divine consciousness penetrated collective human consciousness. Joel's mature mystical practice extended to what he called global healing work. He discovered that divine consciousness knows no geographical boundaries and can bring healing influence to people and situations anywhere in the world through transcendence of space and time. This advanced practice involves entering mystical consciousness and holding specific people, communities, or situations in divine awareness without trying to determine outcomes. The healing power of mystical consciousness flows where it's needed most, guided by divine wisdom. Many students reported remarkable synchronicities when practicing global healing work. They received unexpected help during Joel's mystical sessions, or found solutions to problems, while Joel held them in divine consciousness from thousands of miles away, demonstrating spiritual interconnectedness. Global healing work reveals that mystical consciousness operates beyond physical laws. Distance, Time and material conditions cannot limit the expression of divine love and healing power when channeled through awakened consciousness. Perhaps Joel's most advanced mystical application involved what he called resurrection work, bringing divine consciousness to situations that appeared hopeless or beyond human help. This practice requires complete surrender of human judgment about what's possible. Joel learned to approach apparently desperate circumstances with mystical consciousness that recognizes only divine perfection and infinite possibility. He refused to accept human limitations as final or to be impressed by negative medical, financial, or relationship diagnoses. Resurrection work produced some of Joel's most dramatic healings, restoring relationships that had ended bitterly, reviving businesses that had completely failed, and bringing healing to conditions medical science considered terminal and beyond hope. This advanced practice isn't about denial of problems, but recognition that divine consciousness is more powerful than any human condition. Joel demonstrated that there are no hopeless situations, only limited perspectives that mystical awareness can transform. In his later years, Joel developed mystical consciousness to the point where divine awareness became his normal state, rather than something he accessed occasionally during meditation or healing sessions. This constant mystical consciousness transformed everything he touched. People reported feeling healing energy simply by being in Joel's presence, even when he wasn't consciously trying to heal anyone. His mystical consciousness created an atmosphere where problems resolved naturally and divine guidance flowed freely to everyone around him. This advanced state isn't reserved for special individuals or spiritual masters. Joel insisted that every person has the capacity to develop mystical consciousness to this degree through consistent practice and surrender to divine guidance over time. The key is understanding that mystical consciousness isn't the achievement to attain, but your natural state to uncover. Beneath layers of human conditioning and social programming lies your divine nature, waiting to be recognized and expressed. The ultimate goal of Joel's mystical path isn't to gain special powers or achieve personal advantages over others. It's to become a transparent channel for divine consciousness, to bless the world through your unique expression and individual gifts. This complete transformation happens gradually as you consistently choose mystical awareness over human reaction in daily situations. Joel taught that spiritual maturity means being more concerned with giving divine love than receiving human approval or recognition. When mystical consciousness becomes your primary identity, you discover that your deepest fulfillment comes from serving as an instrument of divine healing and guidance for others who are ready to awaken to their own spiritual nature. Personal desires don't disappear but are transformed. Instead of seeking to get something from life, you become focused on what divine consciousness wants to give through you. This shift creates profound satisfaction and purpose. Joel's mystical vision ultimately revealed that there is no separation between individual consciousness and universal divine consciousness. What appears as personal awakening is actually recognition of the one infinite spirit expressing as all beings and all creation. This understanding dissolves the final illusion of separate selfhood that keeps humans feeling isolated and limited. You realize that your mystical experiences aren't personal achievements, but glimpses of the divine nature that is equally present in everyone and everything. From this mystical perspective, healing others and healing yourself are the same activity. Blessing others and being blessed are one movement of divine consciousness, recognizing its own infinite nature, expressing through apparent multiplicity. This recognition eliminates spiritual pride and competition. You can't be superior to others because you recognize that the same divine consciousness expressing through you is expressing through them, waiting to be acknowledged and allowed. As Joel's mystical consciousness matured, he discovered that the divine presence he had first encountered in 1928 was actually his own deepest nature finally recognizing itself. The separation between human Joel and divine presence was revealed as illusion, created by identification with personality. This recognition transforms your entire approach to spiritual practice. Instead of seeking connection with God somewhere outside yourself, you realize you are the expression of divine consciousness seeking to recognize itself more completely through human experience. Every moment becomes an opportunity for deeper mystical awareness. Whether dealing with mundane tasks or profound challenges, you can always return to recognition of your divine nature and allow this consciousness to guide your responses. The search for God ends when you realize God is what you are. The mystical journey becomes not about reaching some distant goal, but about expressing divine consciousness more fully in present circumstances. The mystical experience that transformed Joel's life is available to you right now in this very moment. It doesn't require special circumstances, years of preparation, or exceptional spiritual gifts. It only requires willingness to recognize your divine nature as present reality. Begin this moment by acknowledging that infinite spirit is your true identity, not your human personality or life circumstances. Feel this mystical consciousness flowing through your awareness, bringing with it the healing power that dissolved Joel's limitations and can dissolve yours. You are not separate from the divine presence that visited Joel that evening in 1928. You are that presence, awakening to its own infinite nature and unlimited power to heal, bless, and transform everything it touches through your individual expression. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path. When Jesus said you are the light of the world, he wasn't giving you a compliment or a distant spiritual goal. He was revealing your actual identity right now. Most people think being the light means doing good deeds or shining positivity. Joel Goldsmith discovered this interpretation keeps you in spiritual darkness, searching outside yourself for what you already are. The revolutionary truth Joel taught is that light isn't something you develop or earn through spiritual practice. Light is consciousness itself, the very awareness reading these words right now. You don't become the light. You realize you never stopped being it. This single recognition transforms everything about how you pray, heal, and live. For decades, seekers have tried to cultivate their inner light through meditation, affirmations, and spiritual disciplines. Joel watched them struggle and fail because they approached light as a future achievement. He taught that the moment you stop trying to become the light and simply recognize you are the light, healing consciousness activates instantly. Daniela spent 15 years in spiritual communities trying to become more enlightened, more loving, more light-filled. She attended workshops, practiced daily meditations, and read countless books. Despite her efforts, she felt increasingly inadequate, always measuring herself against some imagined spiritual standard she could never reach. When she encountered Joel Goldsmith's teachings on being the light, something shifted immediately. He wasn't telling her to develop her light or increase her spiritual vibration. He was pointing to the consciousness that was already aware of her thoughts, her struggles, her seeking. That awareness itself was the light she'd been searching for. Within 3 weeks of this recognition, Daniela's chronic anxiety began dissolving, not because she fixed herself or became more spiritual, but because she stopped treating her true nature as something missing. The light doesn't have anxiety. The light simply is. When you know yourself as that light, the problems of the false self lose their power over you. Joel Goldsmith made a shocking statement that offended many spiritual teachers. He said that trying to become the light of the world is spiritual arrogance disguised as humility. When you believe you must develop or earn your spiritual identity, you're actually denying the truth of what you already are. You're making yourself into a project that needs improvement. This teaching challenges everything modern spirituality promotes. We're surrounded by messages about raising our vibration, clearing our chakras, and ascending to higher consciousness. Joel cut through all of it with one simple truth. Consciousness is already whole, already perfect, already light. Nothing needs to be added or achieved. The practical application changes immediately. Instead of asking, "How can I become more spiritual?" you ask, "What am I already that doesn't need improvement?" Instead of seeking light, you rest as the light that's reading these words. This shift from doing to being is the foundation of Joel's entire mystical approach to healing and transformation. Here's what being the light actually means in Joel Goldsmith's teaching. Light is the infinite consciousness that exists before thoughts, before emotions, before any human condition. It's the awareness that witnesses your entire life experience without being touched by it. When you identify as that awareness, rather than as your thoughts and problems, you've found the light. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's immediately practical. The next time anxiety arises, instead of trying to fix it or pray it away, Recognize the consciousness that's aware of the anxiety. That consciousness isn't anxious. That awareness is the light, untouched by the shadow it observes. In that recognition, the anxiety loses its grip. Joel taught that every spiritual problem comes from forgetting your identity as light and believing you're the darkness you observe. Being the light means remembering what you are, not what you should become. It means resting in the consciousness that exists right now, already whole, already healed, already free. This is the secret that changes everything about spiritual practice. Henry was a successful therapist who helped hundreds of clients but couldn't help himself. His depression had followed him for 20 years through various treatments and spiritual paths. He'd learned to manage it but never felt free from it. He described himself as someone who battled darkness, trying constantly to bring more light into his troubled mind. Joel Goldsmith's teaching reached Henry at his lowest point. The statement, "You are the light of the world," struck him differently than it ever had before, not as encouragement to be better, but as a statement of present fact. What if the depression he'd been fighting wasn't happening to the real Henry at all? What if the real Henry was the awareness watching the depression? Over 6 months, Henry practiced this recognition daily. When depression came, instead of fighting it or analyzing it, he simply rested as the consciousness observing it. He stopped identifying as the depressed person and recognized himself as the light that witnessed depression passing through. Gradually, the depression's intensity decreased. After 9 months, it had dissolved completely, not through treatment, but through recognition. Jennifer's daughter was diagnosed with a learning disability that doctors said would limit her academic future. As a mother, Jennifer felt helpless and desperate. She prayed constantly for her daughter to be healed, to be normal, to succeed. Every prayer came from fear and reinforced the belief that her daughter was somehow incomplete or broken. When Jennifer found Joel's teachings, she understood her mistake. She'd been treating her daughter as darkness that needed light added to it. Joel taught her to recognize her daughter's true identity as light itself, as consciousness that couldn't be limited by any diagnosis or condition. Jennifer stopped praying for change and started recognizing the perfection already present. The transformation took time, but was undeniable. Within 1 school year, her daughter's reading comprehension jumped 3 grade levels. Teachers were amazed, but Jennifer knew what had happened. She'd stopped treating her daughter as a problem needing fixing and started seeing her as the light of the world. That recognition and consciousness produced healing that no amount of worried prayer could achieve. Mateo had built a meditation practice over 12 years, sitting daily for an hour, trying to quiet his mind and find inner peace. He experienced moments of calm but always returned to his anxious, restless thoughts. He believed he needed more practice, better technique, deeper meditation. Joel Goldsmith's teaching completely disrupted his approach. Joel taught that meditation isn't about achieving a peaceful state or silencing thoughts. It's about recognizing the consciousness that's already peaceful, already silent, already perfect, regardless of whether thoughts are present or absent. Mateo realized he'd been treating consciousness as a future achievement rather than his present identity. He stopped trying to improve his meditation and simply rested as the awareness that was already present. Within weeks, his relationship with thoughts transformed completely. They still came and went, but they no longer disturbed him because he knew himself as the light that witnesses them. His 12 years of effort hadn't been wasted, but this simple recognition accomplished what all that striving couldn't. Alexandra worked in a high-stress corporate environment where anxiety was considered normal. Everyone around him took medication or drank heavily to cope. He'd tried both and felt trapped in a cycle of temporary relief followed by increasing dependence. He couldn't see a way out that didn't involve quitting his job or breaking down completely. Joel's teaching on being the light offered Alexandra a completely different approach. Instead of trying to eliminate stress or manage anxiety, he learned to recognize the consciousness that existed before stress, underneath anxiety, witnessing the whole corporate drama without being damaged by it. That consciousness was his true identity, the light of the world. Alexandra practiced this recognition during meetings, deadlines, and conflicts. When pressure mounted, he would pause and recognize, "I am the light observing this pressure, not the person feeling pressured." Over 4 months, his experience of work transformed entirely. The environment hadn't changed, but his identity had. He was no longer the anxious employee, but the light witnessing an anxious employee thought pattern. If these transformation stories inspire you to recognize your true identity as light, like this video to help others discover Joel Goldsmith's revolutionary teaching, subscribe for more consciousness-shifting wisdom, and comment which story resonated most deeply with your own spiritual journey today. Beyond recognizing yourself as light, Joel taught a practical technique he called impersonalization. When problems arise, whether physical pain, emotional distress, or external circumstances, you must see them as impersonal. They're not happening to you because nothing can happen to light. They're simply conditions passing through the space of consciousness you are. This technique sounds simple but requires practice. When pain comes, your first reaction is, "This is my pain. This is happening to me." Joel taught you to immediately correct this. Pain is appearing in consciousness, but I am the consciousness, not the pain. This subtle shift in identification changes everything about how the body and mind respond to difficulty. The key is consistency. Every time a problem presents itself, you practice this recognition. I am not the person with this problem. I am the light of consciousness in which this problem appears. As you strengthen this recognition, problems begin losing their power. Not because you've defeated them through willpower, but because you've stopped giving them the only power they ever had, your identification with them. Joel introduced another complementary practice he called the art of spiritual receptivity. Being the light isn't about projecting energy or forcing change. It's about receiving the truth that already exists. Most people approach spirituality with effort and striving. Joel taught the opposite. Relax into what you already are, rather than reaching for what you think you should become. Spiritual receptivity means creating inner silence where truth can reveal itself. Not the silence of stopped thoughts, but the silence of stopped seeking. When you recognize yourself as light, you stop searching for light. In that cessation of search, deeper recognitions naturally emerge. You begin seeing that everything you need is already present in consciousness itself. Practice this by taking 3 minutes several times daily to simply rest as awareness. Don't try to achieve anything or experience anything special. Just be the consciousness that you are. Notice how this consciousness doesn't need improvement or development. It's already complete. As you practice this receptivity regularly, your entire approach to life shifts from effort to recognition, from doing to being. Joel taught that being the light has immediate practical applications in relationships. When someone attacks you verbally or treats you unkindly, your habitual reaction is to defend yourself or counterattack. This reaction comes from identifying as the person being attacked. But if you're the light, who exactly is being attacked? The light can't be harmed by words or actions. This doesn't mean becoming passive or allowing abuse. It means responding from your true identity rather than from wounded ego. When you know yourself as light, you can address harmful behavior without being damaged by it. You can set boundaries without inner turmoil. You can say no without guilt because the light simply recognizes what's true and acts accordingly. Maria practiced this when her mother criticized her life choices during family gatherings. Previously, these interactions left her feeling devastated for days. Using Joel's teaching, she recognized herself as the light witnessing criticism, not as the criticized daughter. She could then respond calmly, set appropriate boundaries, and leave the conversation without carrying emotional damage. Her mother's behavior didn't change, but Maria's experience of it transformed completely. The final complementary technique Joel emphasized is the practice of recognizing light in others. When you see people as limited, sick, troubled, or wrong, you're not seeing them accurately. You're seeing through the lens of human judgment. Joel taught that every person is equally the light of the world, whether they know it or not. Your recognition of their true nature supports their awakening. This practice challenges you deeply. It's relatively easy to recognize yourself as light in meditation. It's much harder to recognize the light in the person who cuts you off in traffic or the family member who constantly disappoints you. Yet this is where Joel's teaching becomes transformative in daily life. Every encounter becomes an opportunity to see truly. When you practice seeing others as light, something remarkable happens. Not only does your judgment and reactivity decrease, but people often respond to you differently. They sense being seen truly, perhaps for the first time. Your recognition of their light calls it forth. This is how being the light of the world becomes practical service, not by doing things for people, but by seeing who they really are. The most common obstacle students face with this teaching is the mind's insistence that it can't be this simple. You've spent decades believing you're a limited person with real problems. Now someone says you're actually the light of consciousness, and problems are just passing appearances. The mind rebels. It presents evidence. Your bank account, your health issues, your relationship struggles. Joel encountered this resistance constantly. He taught that the mind will always argue for limitation because that's its function. The mind exists to create and solve problems. When you recognize yourself as light, you're operating from a dimension beyond mind. You're not trying to convince the mind of anything. You're simply resting as the consciousness that witnesses the mind's arguments. The breakthrough comes when you stop waiting for the mind to agree before you recognize your true nature. You don't need the mind's permission to be what you are. The light doesn't require the mind's validation. This is why Joel emphasized practice over understanding. You may not fully comprehend how you can be the light while problems still appear, but you can practice the recognition anyway. Understanding follows experience, not the other way around. Another significant challenge is maintaining this recognition during intense difficulty. It's one thing to remember you're the light during quiet meditation. It's entirely different when you're facing a frightening diagnosis, financial crisis, or relationship breakdown. The emotional intensity pulls you back into identifying as the suffering person. This is where most students feel the teaching fails them. Joel addressed this directly. He taught that intense difficulty is actually the most powerful opportunity for this recognition. When everything seems to be falling apart, you have a choice. Identify as the person to whom terrible things are happening, or recognize yourself as the consciousness in which terrible things are appearing. The first choice leads to suffering piled on suffering. The second leads to peace in the midst of storm. Rachel experienced this when her husband suddenly left after 20 years of marriage. The pain was overwhelming. But she'd been practicing Joel's teaching for 2 years. In her darkest moments, she would return to the recognition. I am the light of consciousness witnessing devastating emotions, not the devastated person. This didn't eliminate the grief, but it prevented the grief from destroying her. She moved through the divorce with surprising strength because she knew her true identity remained untouched. The third major obstacle is confusing being the light with spiritual bypassing. Some students use this teaching to avoid feeling emotions or facing practical responsibilities. They say I'm just consciousness, so this job loss doesn't really affect me, while failing to take necessary action. This distortion of Joel's teaching creates more problems than it solves. Joel was clear about this distinction. Being the light doesn't mean denying human experience or avoiding practical life. It means knowing your true identity while fully engaging with circumstances. You pay your bills, you feel your emotions, you take appropriate action. But you do all of this from the recognition that you are the consciousness in which these activities occur, not a limited person struggling through them. The test is simple. If your spiritual practice increases your peace and effectiveness in life, you're on the right path. If it's making you passive, avoidant, or disconnected from reality, you've misunderstood the teaching. The light engages fully with life while remaining untouched by life. It's not detachment from experience, but clear seeing through experience to the consciousness that makes all experience possible. The fourth challenge involves dealing with physical pain and illness. Students often report that they can recognize themselves as light during emotional difficulties, but physical pain seems to prove they're just a body. Joel taught extensively on this because he himself experienced physical challenges and found freedom through recognition of true identity. The key understanding is that pain is a sensation appearing in consciousness, not something happening to consciousness itself. When pain arises, immediately there's awareness of pain. That awareness, that consciousness that knows pain is present, is who you are. The pain is an object being observed. You are the subject, the light, doing the observing. This distinction must be practiced repeatedly until it becomes natural. Gregory had chronic back pain that doctors couldn't effectively treat for 8 years. Using Joel's teaching, he practiced recognizing himself as the consciousness aware of pain rather than as the person in pain. He described it as watching pain from a distance, even though the sensation remained intense. Over 6 months of consistent practice, the pain's intensity gradually decreased. After a year, it was completely gone. His doctors found no medical explanation for the healing that occurred. If these obstacle-breaking techniques are revealing new possibilities for your spiritual journey, like this video to support consciousness-expanding content, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith teachings, and comment which challenge you're most ready to transform through recognition of your true identity as light. Advanced practice involves recognizing yourself as light during everyday activities, not just during crisis or meditation. Joel taught that the purpose of spiritual realization isn't to escape life, but to bring the light of consciousness into every moment. This means practicing awareness while working, eating, talking, driving. You begin living from your true identity rather than visiting it occasionally. Start with simple activities. While washing dishes, recognize that you're not really the person washing dishes. You're the consciousness in which the activity of dishwashing appears. While talking with someone, notice that you're the awareness witnessing conversation, not just the person speaking. These small recognitions throughout the day strengthen your identity as light until it becomes your natural state. James was a surgeon who initially thought Joel's teaching was interesting philosophy, but had no practical application to his demanding work. Then he began practicing awareness during surgery. He recognized himself as the consciousness in which surgical skill appeared, not as the limited person trying not to make mistakes. His performance improved dramatically. He described feeling guided by something beyond his trained knowledge, making decisions with unexpected clarity and confidence. Joel taught advanced students about the principle of light revealing itself. As you consistently practice recognizing your true nature, consciousness begins spontaneously showing you things you never learned through study. You have sudden insights about situations, clear knowing about decisions, creative solutions appearing without effortful thinking. This is the light of consciousness operating without mental interference. This isn't mystical or supernatural. It's natural functioning when you're not blocking it with identification as a limited person. Your true nature as light includes intelligence far beyond mental reasoning. Joel called this spiritual sense, the capacity to know truth directly without mental processing. As you rest in your identity as light, this spiritual sense activates naturally. Patricia experienced this in her business. She'd struggled for years to grow her company through careful planning and market analysis. After 6 months of practicing Joel's teaching on being the light, she began receiving clear insights about business direction that contradicted conventional wisdom. She followed these intuitions despite fear. Within 18 months, her company had tripled in size. She attributed the success entirely to learning to trust the intelligence of consciousness itself, rather than relying only on her limited mind. Another advanced application involves recognizing yourself as light during sleep and dreams. Joel taught that consciousness doesn't sleep, only the body and mind sleep. As you strengthen your identity as awareness, you begin experiencing yourself as the light that witnesses even sleeping and dreaming. This opens dimensions of spiritual experience that most people never access. The practice is simple but requires patience. Before sleep, consciously recognize yourself as the awareness that will witness the body falling asleep. Don't try to stay awake. Just maintain recognition that you are the consciousness in which sleep occurs, not the person who sleeps. Over time, you'll notice awareness persisting through sleep states. You'll remember dreams more clearly and sometimes experience lucid awareness during dreaming. Stephen practiced this for 8 months before experiencing his first breakthrough. He remained aware as his body fell asleep, watching thoughts slow down and consciousness shift into dream state, while maintaining recognition of his identity as light. He described it as the most profound spiritual experience of his life, proving beyond doubt that he was not the body or mind, but the consciousness that witnesses all states. This recognition transformed his entire relationship with existence. Joel's most advanced teaching on being the light involves recognizing that there's no separate you being the light. Even the statement "you are the light" eventually must be transcended. At the highest level of recognition, there's only light. There's no person who has light or is light. There's just consciousness being itself, appearing as all experience, all apparent individuals, all of existence. This teaching can sound abstract, but it has immediate practical application. When you finally release the last identification with being a separate individual who has spiritual identity, total freedom emerges. There's no longer anyone trying to maintain recognition or achieve anything spiritual. There's just the light recognizing itself everywhere, as everything, including what you've called yourself. This is where Joel's teaching ultimately points, not to an improved spiritual person, but to the recognition that the person itself is an appearance in light. When this is seen clearly, the entire spiritual search ends, not because you've achieved some ultimate state, but because you've recognized what was always true. The light has always been recognizing itself. You've always been that recognition. Nothing has ever been outside of or separate from the light that you are. Everything you've learned through this teaching culminates in a simple practice that changes your entire life. Each morning before getting caught in the day's activities, pause and recognize, I am the light of the world. Not as an affirmation trying to make something true, but as recognition of what already is. Spend 3 minutes resting as that light, that consciousness, that awareness. Throughout the day, whenever you remember, return to this recognition. Don't wait for problems to arise. Practice during neutral moments, while drinking coffee, waiting at traffic lights, between tasks. These small returns to truth accumulate. They build an identity foundation that can't be shaken by circumstances. Your sense of who you are shifts from the changing person to the unchanging light. At night before sleep, recognize again. I am the light that witnesses this body preparing for rest. I am the consciousness that remains awake while the body sleeps. This brackets your entire day in truth. You begin in recognition, you return to recognition throughout the day, and you end in recognition. This simple practice, done consistently, transforms your life more than any complex spiritual system. The transformation Joel promised isn't just personal peace or better circumstances. It's a complete shift in how you experience existence. When you truly know yourself as light, fear loses its foundation. What is there to fear when you recognize you're the consciousness that witnesses everything but can't be damaged by anything? Death itself becomes just another appearance in the light you are. This doesn't mean problems disappear or life becomes perfect in human terms. It means you're no longer imprisoned by circumstances. You remain the light regardless of what appears. Health or illness, wealth or poverty, success or failure, all become movements in consciousness that you witness without losing your identity. This is the freedom Joel experienced and taught. Marcus lived this truth during his final months with terminal illness. Having practiced Joel's teaching for 5 years, he faced death with remarkable peace. He told his family, I'm watching this body decline, but I'm not declining. The light I am has never been sick and can't die. His peaceful transition inspired everyone around him. They witnessed someone who truly recognized their identity as eternal consciousness rather than temporary form. Joel Goldsmith's ultimate gift was making the light accessible to ordinary people. You don't need special abilities, years of study, or guru initiation. You need only the willingness to recognize what you already are. This teaching is radically democratic. The light of consciousness is equally present in everyone. Your education, status, or spiritual background doesn't matter. The light simply is. This means you can begin immediately. Right now, as you process these words, notice the awareness that's reading them. That awareness is the light. It's already present. It's already who you are. You don't become it through practice. You simply stop overlooking it. The spiritual search ends the moment you recognize what's already here. Joel spent 50 years helping people make this recognition. His books, recordings, and teachings all point to the same truth. You are the light of the world right now, exactly as you are. Not in the future when you've improved yourself, not if you meditate more or become more spiritual. Now, the recognition changes everything while changing nothing. You remain the same person with the same circumstances, but you know your true identity. That knowing is the difference between suffering and freedom. As we close, understand that being the light of the world isn't a teaching to believe. It's a recognition to confirm through direct experience. Test it. When problems arise, Practice recognizing yourself as the consciousness witnessing problems rather than as the person having problems. Notice what changes. When emotions surge, recognize yourself as the awareness that observes emotions rather than as the emotional person. Watch what happens. Give this practice 90 days of consistent application. That's all Joel asked of his students. 90 days of returning to the recognition I am the light of consciousness throughout each day. If after that time you haven't experienced significant transformation in your peace, clarity, and freedom, you can return to whatever approach you were using before. But he knew that genuine practice produces undeniable results. The light you are has been waiting for this recognition your entire life. It's never been absent. It's been right here, reading these words, listening to these ideas, being the awareness that makes all experience possible. The search for what you are ends the moment you recognize what you've always been. The light of the world isn't somewhere else. It's not someone else. It's you. It always has been. Welcome home to your true identity. If this teaching has expanded your spiritual understanding and revealed your true nature as the light of consciousness, like this video to illuminate this path for others, subscribe for transformative Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment, I am the light, to confirm your recognition and commitment to living from your eternal identity. You've been taught that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth means justice through revenge. Churches have preached it as divine law for centuries. Society built entire legal systems on this interpretation. Governments justified wars with this principle. But Joel Goldsmith discovered something that will shatter everything you believed about this ancient teaching, and what he found changes not just biblical understanding but your power to live free from attack. What if I told you this phrase was never about punishment at all? What if it was actually a mystical instruction for spiritual protection that organized religion deliberately misunderstood for 2,000 years? The truth has been hidden in plain sight, encoded in Scripture, waiting for consciousness advanced enough to recognize it. Today you're about to discover what it really means and how it can transform every conflict in your life. This isn't just biblical interpretation or theological debate. This is a consciousness technique that can transform how you respond to every attack, insult, betrayal, or injustice in your life. Joel Goldsmith called it the principle of impersonalization, and it's one of the most powerful spiritual secrets ever taught. Masters have used this for centuries to remain untouchable by human malice while living in the midst of conflict and chaos. When you understand what eye for an eye truly means, you gain access to a level of spiritual immunity that nothing external can penetrate. You stop being a victim of other people's consciousness and become a master of your own experience. You discover that the ancient teaching wasn't about what others do to you, but about what consciousness you hold within yourself. Let me take you back to the moment when Joel Goldsmith first penetrated this mystery. He was deep in meditation, studying ancient Hebrew texts, when he realized something that made him sit up in shock. The original context of eye for an eye wasn't about literal retaliation at all. It was about spiritual equivalent and the immutable law of consciousness that governs all human experience. In mystical Hebrew tradition, which the rabbis understood but rarely taught publicly, the eye represents spiritual perception and consciousness. The tooth represents the power to consume, to take in, to make something part of your experience. So eye for an eye really means perception for perception, consciousness for consciousness returning to itself. It's describing how reality operates as a perfect mirror, reflecting back exactly what we project from the depths of our consciousness. When someone attacks you, criticizes you, betrays you, or seeks to harm you, they're actually revealing their own consciousness level to you. They're showing you their inner world, their spiritual state, their level of understanding. Joel taught that grasping this single truth changes everything because you immediately stop taking attacks personally and start seeing them as impersonal manifestations of human consciousness operating at whatever level that person has attained. This shift from personal to impersonal is the key that unlocks spiritual immunity. When you see an attack as personal, aimed specifically at you because of who you are, you absorb the poison. You carry the wound. You react from pain and create more conflict. But when you see the attack as impersonal consciousness expressing itself through that particular person, something miraculous happens that Joel proved thousands of times in his healing practice. Here's where the teaching becomes revolutionary and practical. Joel Goldsmith taught that when you truly understand eye for an eye as a consciousness principle rather than a revenge doctrine, you gain immunity to harm. Not physical immunity necessarily, though that sometimes occurs, but spiritual immunity that completely changes your entire experience of conflict, attack, and human malice in ways that seem impossible until you experience it yourself. Think carefully about the last time someone criticized you harshly, betrayed your trust, spread lies about you, or treated you with deliberate cruelty. Your natural human response was probably hurt that cut deep, anger that consumed your peace, or the burning desire to retaliate and make them feel what you felt. That's because you personalized the attack completely. You made it about you, about your worth, about whether you deserved such treatment. But Joel discovered through years of spiritual practice and mystical insight that attacks aren't personal at all, even when they appear personal. They're impersonal operations of human consciousness, expressing itself at whatever level of spiritual understanding that consciousness has reached. The person attacking you could have attacked anyone. The attack comes from their consciousness state, not from truth about you. When you genuinely see an attack as impersonal consciousness expressing itself, something miraculous occurs that changes your entire experience. The attack loses its power over you instantly. You don't absorb the poison into your being. You don't carry the wound forward into your future. You recognize it as human belief operating through that person, appearing as attack, but having no basis in spiritual reality or truth about your divine identity. This is the secret that literally changes everything about how you experience life. Eye for an eye means you receive back the exact consciousness you hold and entertain. If you hold consciousness of being attacked, vulnerable, and victimized, you will experience attack, vulnerability, and victimization. If you hold consciousness of divine immunity, spiritual protection, and untouchable identity, you will experience protection regardless of what appears to happen in the external world of human drama. Joel Goldsmith didn't just teach this as theory or spiritual philosophy. He proved this principle worked in his own life repeatedly, consistently, demonstrably. When faced with vicious criticism from religious authorities, with competition from jealous practitioners, with actual malice from people who wanted to destroy his work, he would immediately shift into spiritual consciousness and recognize the attack as impersonal human belief operating at that level with absolutely no power in divine reality. The situations would dissolve without him fighting back. The attacks would lose their momentum. The attackers would often apologize later or simply disappear from his experience, not through his human effort or defensive action, but through the operation of spiritual law responding to his consciousness. This is what eye for an eye really describes, the law of consciousness creating equivalent experience. The reason this profound teaching was misunderstood for millennia is embarrassingly simple. The human mind wants revenge desperately. It wants justice through punishment. It wants to see attackers suffer. But spiritual law operates on a completely different principle. It operates through consciousness level, not through human action or reaction. When you change your consciousness, you automatically and inevitably change your experience without doing anything in the external world. Let me share a transformation story that demonstrates this principle with such clarity that you'll never doubt its power again. Sarah was going through the most brutal divorce imaginable. Her ex-husband, consumed by rage and vindictiveness, was lying systematically in court proceedings, turning their children against her with calculated manipulation, spreading vicious rumors throughout their community, and using his greater financial resources to destroy her. She was consumed with rage that burned through her day and night. The desire for revenge obsessed her thoughts. She fantasized about exposing his lies, destroying his reputation, making him pay for every moment of suffering he caused. She could barely eat or sleep. Her health was deteriorating. Her remaining relationships were suffering because she could talk about nothing but his attacks. When Sarah discovered Joel Goldsmith's teaching on impersonalization through a friend's recommendation, she was deeply skeptical. How could seeing attacks as impersonal possibly help when someone was actively, deliberately, personally destroying your life? It seemed like spiritual bypass, like denial of reality, like foolish passivity in the face of real evil. But she was desperate enough to try the practice Joel recommended, every single time she felt attacked. which was dozens of times daily. She would pause whatever she was doing and say internally with as much conviction as she could muster, "This is not personal. This is human consciousness operating at this level of fear and pain. This has no power in divine reality. I refuse to accept this into my consciousness." For 3 weeks of faithful practice, nothing seemed to change in the external situation. The attacks continued relentlessly. The legal battles intensified. But something profound was shifting inside her consciousness. By week 4, Sarah noticed something remarkable. She wasn't carrying the emotional poison anymore. She could think about her ex-husband's actions without rage instantly consuming her peace. She could hear about new attacks without her body flooding with stress hormones. She was observing the drama rather than being destroyed by it. Her sleep improved. Her appetite returned. Friends commented that she seemed different, lighter, more herself. Then something completely unexpected happened in the external situation. Her ex-husband's lawyer called her lawyer, requesting mediation rather than continued litigation. In the mediation session, her ex-husband seemed different, less aggressive, almost confused about his own behavior. Within 2 months, they reached a settlement that was remarkably fair, given how the case had been proceeding. Sarah later learned from mutual friends that her ex-husband had told people he didn't know why he'd been so vicious. He said something had shifted and he couldn't maintain the rage anymore. Sarah understood what Joel taught. Her consciousness shift had changed the entire energy field of the situation. When she stopped empowering the attack by fighting it from wounded consciousness, divine law could operate and resolve what human effort could never fix. This wasn't coincidence or lucky timing. This was consciousness law operating as reliably as gravity. Eye for an eye had played out perfectly. Sarah's consciousness of being attacked had created experience of attack. When she shifted to consciousness of spiritual immunity, the attack lost its power and the situation transformed. Joel had proven this pattern thousands of times in 40 years of teaching and healing work. Another profoundly powerful example comes from Marcus, a successful business owner whose trusted partner of 15 years embezzled over $200,000 and disappeared completely, leaving the business on the verge of bankruptcy. Marcus was financially devastated, legally advised that recovery was unlikely, and emotionally destroyed by the betrayal from someone he'd considered family. His anger was literally eating him alive. He couldn't focus on saving his business because rage consumed his thoughts day and night. His blood pressure skyrocketed. He developed stress-related health problems. His remaining employees were worried about him. His family didn't know how to help. He was trapped in consciousness of betrayal, victimization, and righteous fury that felt completely justified, but was destroying him faster than the financial loss. Marcus began practicing Joel's principle of impersonalization with the intensity of someone who had nothing left to lose. Every morning before even getting out of bed, he would spend 30 minutes in meditation recognizing the impersonal nature of greed, dishonesty, and betrayal. He worked to see his former partner not as personally against him, but as operating from a consciousness of lack and fear so powerful that theft seemed necessary for survival. This practice didn't excuse the crime legally or morally. Marcus still pursued every legal avenue available, but it freed him completely from the spiritual poison of hatred that was killing him. Within 6 weeks of daily practice, Marcus reported feeling genuine peace for the first time since the betrayal. His blood pressure normalized. His focus returned. His business began recovering because he could think clearly again. His creativity came back. Then, 8 months after beginning the impersonalization practice, something extraordinary occurred. Authorities in another state contacted Marcus. His former partner had been located through an unrelated investigation and significant assets were being recovered. The legal process would take time, but Marcus would recover most of his losses. But here's what Marcus told Joel directly. He didn't even care that much about the money by that point. The real recovery had already happened in his consciousness. He'd been freed from the prison of hatred and victimization. He'd discovered that his peace didn't depend on external justice. He'd learned that consciousness is the only thing that truly matters, because consciousness creates experience. Joel would say this wasn't magic or mysticism in the sense of supernatural intervention. This was consciousness law operating as precisely and reliably as any physical law. When you stop empowering human evil by fighting it from the level of human consciousness, divine law, has space to operate. When you impersonalize, you remove yourself from the battlefield of human conflict and let spiritual principle handle what human effort cannot resolve. Marcus's experience demonstrates what eye for an eye really means in practical application. His consciousness of being betrayed created the experience of betrayal consuming his life. When he shifted to consciousness of spiritual immunity and impersonal recognition, his experience transformed even before the external situation resolved. The consciousness shift was the real healing. The money recovery was just confirmation that spiritual law operates in practical affairs. If these real transformation stories inspire you to discover more of Joel Goldsmith's hidden teachings that actually work in daily life, like this video to help others find this wisdom, subscribe for more consciousness principles with practical applications, and comment which story resonated most powerfully with your current situation or challenges. Jennifer's story reveals how this principle works with ongoing daily attacks that seem endless. She worked in a toxic corporate environment with a supervisor who seemed personally determined to destroy her career through systematic harassment. Constant public criticism in meetings, deliberate humiliation in front of clients, blocked promotions despite excellent performance, and carefully documented false accusations designed to build a termination case. Human Resources was completely unhelpful, essentially telling Jennifer to deal with it or leave. The job market made leaving difficult. Jennifer felt trapped in a nightmare of daily attacks that were grinding down her spirit, her confidence, and her mental health. She would drive to work with her stomach in knots, spend the entire day in fight-or-flight mode, and come home emotionally exhausted. Joel Goldsmith's teaching on impersonalization gave Jennifer a completely different approach to her situation. Instead of continuing to defend herself legally, plot revenge fantasies, or sink into victimhood and depression, she began to practice seeing her supervisor as a soul struggling with deep insecurity and fear, rather than as a personal enemy determined to destroy her specifically. She practiced recognizing that the attacks were not about Jennifer's worth, competence, or value as a human being. They were about her supervisor's consciousness state, probably driven by feeling threatened by Jennifer's competence, struggling with personal problems Jennifer knew nothing about, and operating from a level of consciousness that produces attacking behavior. The attacks were impersonal consciousness expressing itself, not truth about Jennifer. Jennifer committed to spending 10 minutes every single morning before work, establishing her consciousness firmly in spiritual truth. She would sit in her car in the parking lot and practice recognizing that she was divinely protected, that human malice had no power in spiritual reality, that her true identity was untouchable by human belief or behavior, and that this situation was an opportunity to prove consciousness principle rather than a victimization. She stopped reacting emotionally to attacks, which initially confused her supervisor and eventually began to defuse the dynamic. When criticized in meetings, Jennifer would pause internally, recognize it as impersonal consciousness, refuse to absorb the poison, and respond calmly from facts rather than defensiveness. Her supervisor seemed confused that the attacks weren't landing as before. Within 3 months of consistent practice, something shifted dramatically. Her supervisor was abruptly transferred to another department as part of a reorganization. Jennifer was promoted to a position she'd been denied repeatedly. The new supervisor was collaborative and supportive. Jennifer later learned through office gossip that her former supervisor was dealing with severe personal issues, including divorce and financial problems that had nothing to do with Jennifer. The attacks had always been impersonal projections of pain and fear, exactly as Joel taught. Jennifer's supervisor had been attacking life itself through attacking Jennifer. When Jennifer stopped accepting the attacks into her consciousness, stopped empowering them with her emotional reaction, the entire dynamic collapsed because it takes 2 consciousnesses to maintain a conflict. When one consciousness shifts to impersonalization, conflict cannot continue. These 3 detailed stories reveal something profound that you need to grasp completely. When you understand eye for an eye as consciousness principle rather than revenge instruction, you gain access to a level of spiritual protection and immunity that human effort cannot provide through any amount of self-defense, legal action, or counterattack. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become a conscious participant in spiritual law. Joel Goldsmith spent 4 decades proving this principle worked consistently across thousands of cases. Not sometimes randomly, not occasionally when conditions were right, but as reliable spiritual law that operates as precisely as mathematical principle. The key is understanding with your entire being that attacks are always impersonal operations of human consciousness at whatever level, and your only real work is maintaining your own consciousness at the level of spiritual truth. This doesn't mean you don't take practical action when needed and appropriate. You absolutely still use legal systems when crimes occur. You set firm boundaries with toxic people. You protect yourself physically when threatened. But you take these practical actions from a consciousness of spiritual immunity rather than from fear, hatred, or victimization. That internal shift changes everything about the effectiveness of your actions. When you act from wounded consciousness, your actions are contaminated by the poison you've absorbed. They're driven by reaction rather than wisdom. They often escalate conflict or create new problems. But when you act from clear consciousness that has impersonalized the attack, your actions are guided by divine wisdom. They're effective because they're not distorted by emotional poison. You respond rather than react, and that difference is everything. Now let me teach you the specific technique Joel Goldsmith used for impersonalization in exact detail. This isn't vague theory or general spiritual philosophy. This is the actual practice that protected him and thousands of his students from psychological harm, emotional devastation, and spiritual poison. The technique has 3 essential steps that must be practiced exactly as Joel taught them for maximum effectiveness. Step 1 is immediate recognition, the instant you become aware of feeling attacked. The very moment you feel attacked, criticized, betrayed, insulted, or harmed in any way, you pause whatever you're doing and say internally with full attention, "This is not personal to me. This is impersonal human consciousness expressing itself at this level." You're not denying the attack happened in the human scene. You're correctly identifying its true nature and source. Step 2 is conscious refusal to absorb the poison being offered. You deliberately and consciously refuse to take the attack into your consciousness as truth about yourself. You recognize that the other person is essentially offering you their consciousness state, their pain, their fear, their limited perception, and you have the spiritual power to decline the offer completely. Joel would say firmly, "I will not accept this into my consciousness. It has no power in spiritual reality." Step 3 is establishing divine truth about your identity and experience. You consciously affirm your true identity as spiritual consciousness, eternally untouchable by human belief, opinion, or malice. You rest in the awareness that nothing external has power to harm your true being or determine your experience. This isn't positive thinking or affirmation trying to change reality. This is recognition of spiritual fact that's always true regardless of appearances. Joel taught a complementary practice he called the principle of one power that enhances impersonalization by addressing the fundamental root of why attacks seem powerful in the first place. We've been conditioned to believe in 2 powers operating in the universe: good and evil, God and devil, forces attacking us and forces defending us. But spiritual reality knows only one power, and grasping this transforms everything. When you encounter any attack of any kind, immediately recognize with your full understanding that evil has no actual power because only one power exists in reality. The appearance of attack is human consciousness misperceiving reality, exactly like mistaking a rope for a snake in dim light. The snake never existed as a real threat. Only the misperception had power to create fear. But the fear was based on illusion, not reality. Practice establishing one power consciousness daily, not just during attacks. Every single morning as part of your spiritual practice, establish firmly in consciousness that only divine power operates in your experience. Human malice, disease, lack, limitation, and fear are not secondary powers fighting against good. They're illusions, misperceptions, beliefs that dissolve completely when consciousness recognizes that only one power exists. Joel proved this principle of one power repeatedly in his healing work with so-called incurable diseases. Medical conditions that seemed overwhelmingly powerful, diseases that appeared unstoppable and terminal, would dissolve when consciousness firmly established the truth of one power operating. The same exact principle applies to human attacks. They're not real power opposing you. Their misperception appearing as power but having no substance in reality. Another crucial technique Joel taught is what he called witness consciousness. This practice trains you to observe human drama without becoming entangled in it, without identifying with the character being attacked. When attacks happen, you consciously step back mentally and watch the entire situation from a higher perspective, like watching a movie rather than being the actor on screen getting attacked. From witness consciousness, you see the complete picture with clarity. You see the attacker's pain and fear driving their behavior. You see your own habitual reactions and patterns. You see the impersonal nature of human consciousness playing out its dramas according to the level of understanding present. This perspective naturally creates immunity because you're no longer identified with the small self that can be attacked. Practice this witness consciousness throughout your day with small irritations first to build the capacity. When someone cuts you off in traffic, witness the irritation arising in your consciousness without becoming the irritation, without identifying with it. When someone speaks rudely in a store, witness the reaction without being consumed by it. Build this witness capacity gradually with minor situations. When major attacks come, you'll have developed the spiritual muscle to immediately shift into witness consciousness automatically. The attack still happens in the human scene where bodies and personalities interact, but you're observing from spiritual consciousness, from your true identity that cannot be touched. From that elevated space, divine wisdom can guide your response rather than human reaction controlling you. Joel's final complementary technique is blessing the attacker, which sounds completely impossible when you're hurt, but is scientifically powerful for shifting your own consciousness instantly. You're not blessing the attack itself or condoning the behavior. You're blessing the person's true spiritual identity that exists beyond their current limited consciousness level and the actions it produces. The practice is simple in form, but profound in effect. When someone attacks you, after you've impersonalized and established one power and shifted to witness consciousness, you then silently bless them with genuine intention. You say internally, "Father, bless this person's true spiritual nature. Reveal to them their divine identity. Free them from the consciousness of fear and pain that drives this attacking behavior." This practice isn't primarily for their benefit, though it may help them eventually. It's for your consciousness immediately. The moment you genuinely bless an attacker from your heart, you cannot simultaneously hate them or hold poison toward them. You cannot maintain cursing consciousness while blessing. Your consciousness automatically shifts to a higher level where the attack cannot touch you because blessing and being wounded cannot coexist. Joel taught clearly that blessing doesn't mean allowing abuse to continue or being passive toward injustice. You still set necessary boundaries firmly. You take legal action if warranted. You remove yourself from toxic situations. But you do all these practical things from a blessed consciousness rather than a cursed consciousness. That internal difference changes your entire experience and very often transforms outcomes in ways human effort alone cannot achieve. Now let's address honestly the real challenges you'll face when practicing this principle in your actual life. The biggest obstacle by far is the human mind's absolute conviction, supported by a lifetime of conditioning, that attacks are personal. Your ego will insist ferociously that this attack is about you specifically, aimed at you deliberately, designed to hurt you personally because of who you are or what you've done. That belief that attacks are personal is actually the poison itself, not the attack. The attack is just words, actions, or circumstances in the external world. The poison is your consciousness personalizing it, taking it in, making it truth about yourself, carrying it forward into your future. When you first try to impersonalize an attack, your mind will rebel with tremendous force. Your mind will produce 1,000 apparently logical reasons why this situation is different from all others, why this attack really is personal unlike other attacks, why the technique won't work here even if it worked elsewhere. Joel warned his students explicitly about this resistance. He called it the human mind's fierce resistance to spiritual law, because the ego survives through personalizing everything. The practice requires patient repetition and commitment. The first 20 or 30 times you attempt to impersonalize attacks, it will probably feel fake, mechanical, ineffective. Your emotions will still be triggered instantly. You'll still feel hurt or angry or afraid. This is completely normal and expected. You're retraining consciousness that's been conditioned for decades, possibly lifetimes, to personalize absolutely everything that happens. Joel strongly advised his students to practice impersonalization on small irritations first rather than waiting for major betrayals. Don't make your first attempt at this technique the moment you discover your spouse's affair or your business partner's embezzlement. Practice on daily annoyances, minor criticisms, small slights, traffic incidents, rude store clerks. Build the consciousness muscle gradually so it's genuinely strong when serious attacks come. Another major challenge people face is the fear that impersonalization means becoming passive, becoming a doormat, allowing abuse to continue without response. People worry that if they stop taking attacks personally, they'll become weak and ineffective. This completely misunderstands the principle and what Joel actually taught. Impersonalization actually empowers you to respond far more effectively than personalization does. When you personalize attacks, you react from wounded ego consciousness. Your responses are driven by hurt, anger, fear, shame, or the desperate need to defend yourself and prove your worth. These emotional reactions are rarely wise or effective. They often escalate conflict dramatically or create entirely new problems. You're fighting from a consciousness of being attacked, which means you've already lost. When you impersonalize completely, you respond from spiritual wisdom rather than human reaction. You see the situation with clarity undistorted by emotional poison. You can take strong action if needed. You can set firm boundaries. You can use legal systems. You can walk away entirely. But you do everything from power and clarity rather than from woundedness. Your actions are effective because they're not contaminated by absorbed poison. The challenge of ongoing, persistent attacks requires special attention and advanced practice. What do you do when impersonalization seems to work momentarily, but attacks continue relentlessly? When a toxic family member, co-worker, neighbor, or situation persists despite your faithful consciousness work? Joel had very specific guidance for this scenario that many students face. First, recognize clearly that your work isn't to change the attacker or stop the attacks through your consciousness. Your work is solely to maintain your own consciousness at the level of spiritual truth, regardless of what's happening externally. The attacks might continue in the external human scene while your internal experience transforms completely. That's still absolute success in spiritual terms. Second, understand that persistence of attacks often means you're being called to deeper, more committed practice. You might be impersonalizing intellectually, saying the right words, but still carrying emotional charge underneath. Joel would say, go deeper into the practice. Practice longer periods. Be more vigilant about the consciousness you're entertaining during the day when not in formal practice. Third, honestly, examine if you need to take practical action you've been avoiding. Impersonalization isn't a substitute for setting necessary boundaries, leaving genuinely toxic situations, or using legal protection when warranted. Spiritual principle and practical action work together harmoniously. Sometimes the divine guidance that comes through clear consciousness is to physically remove yourself from the situation entirely. Let me share the breakthrough moment that usually comes after several weeks of faithful daily practice. You'll notice quite suddenly that attacks don't trigger the same emotional devastation they once did automatically. Someone can say the same hurtful thing that would have destroyed your peace for days before, and you feel surprisingly untouched, almost surprised at your own lack of reaction. This shift isn't numbness or emotional suppression or denial. You still recognize clearly that the attack happened in the human scene. You might still choose to take appropriate action, but the poison doesn't enter your consciousness. The wound doesn't form in your psyche. You observe human consciousness operating at that level without making it your reality or truth about yourself. Joel called this breakthrough moment achieving spiritual immunity, and it's one of the most liberating experiences possible in human life. The breakthrough often comes suddenly after gradual internal work you couldn't see happening. Students report a moment when they realized they'd been attacked significantly but completely forgot to be hurt. They impersonalized automatically without conscious effort. That's when you know the principle has moved from intellectual understanding to actual consciousness demonstration. If these advanced techniques for overcoming spiritual obstacles and achieving immunity speak directly to your heart and need, like this video to support Joel Goldsmith's teachings reaching people who desperately need them, subscribe for more advanced consciousness practices with detailed instructions, and comment which specific challenge you're personally committed to transforming through impersonalization starting today. Now let's explore advanced application in the most difficult scenarios possible. What about attacks from people you deeply love? Family members who criticize you constantly and cruelly, romantic partners who betray your trust completely, adult children who reject you despite everything you've given them. Joel taught that these are actually the most important situations to practice impersonalization, not the least. When someone you love attacks you, the personalization goes infinitely deeper because you're emotionally attached to their opinion and their love. You desperately want them to see you truly, love you rightly, treat you well. When they don't, when they attack instead, the wound cuts to your very core identity. Joel understood this pain intimately from his own life experience. The practice remains exactly the same, but requires absolutely fierce commitment and repeated application. This person I love is operating from a consciousness level that produces this attacking behavior. It's not about my worth or value. It's not personal truth about me. It's their consciousness state expressing itself according to spiritual law. I refuse to let their consciousness level become my experience or determine my peace. Joel would add something crucial here that changes how you see the practice. When you successfully impersonalize attacks from loved ones, you actually free them from the dynamic. Your refusal to engage at that consciousness level, your refusal to absorb their poison and throw it back, creates space for them to shift if they're capable. Not always, not guaranteed, but often. Your consciousness work removes the energetic dynamic that was sustaining the conflict pattern. Advanced practitioners face another challenging scenario, attacks that seem completely justified by your actual mistakes. What if you genuinely did something wrong? What if the criticism is objectively valid? Joel's answer might surprise you profoundly. Impersonalization applies even when you've made genuine mistakes. Perhaps especially then, because that's when you're most vulnerable to absorbing poison. Valid criticism still doesn't need to be personalized into your consciousness as identity. You can fully acknowledge your error, make appropriate amends, and change your behavior going forward without taking poison into your consciousness. The mistake was an action in time, not your eternal identity. The criticism reveals the other person's response and consciousness, not ultimate truth about your worth as a spiritual being. Joel made a crucial distinction between accepting responsibility and accepting condemnation. You take full responsibility for actions and their consequences. You make repairs where possible. You learn and grow. But you don't accept the consciousness of shame, guilt, unworthiness, or being fundamentally flawed. Those are human additions to simple fact, not spiritual truth about your divine identity. This practice actually makes genuine apology and real change far more possible. When you're not defending a wounded ego or protecting a shaky sense of worth, you can see your errors with clarity and address them effectively. When criticism doesn't threaten your core identity, you can receive the valid information it contains without the poison of condemnation that blocks growth. The most advanced application Joel taught is impersonalizing attacks on your spiritual understanding and practice itself. These are the most dangerous attacks because they're not aimed at your body, emotions, or reputation. They're aimed at undermining the very consciousness work that's been transforming your life and giving you freedom from suffering. When people mock your spiritual beliefs, ridicule your practices as delusion, undermine your spiritual authority, or insist you're wasting your life on fantasy, something deeper is being challenged than surface opinions. These attacks trigger existential fear that maybe you are deluded, maybe you are wasting your time, maybe you're following false teaching that's leading you away from reality. Joel said these spiritual attacks come precisely when you're making genuine progress and something wants desperately to stop it. The attacks reveal that your consciousness shift is threatening to other consciousness levels. People operating from purely material consciousness feel threatened by spiritual consciousness and attack it reflexively. The impersonalization here requires recognizing that attacks on spiritual truth are never about the truth itself, which is eternal and untouchable. Divine reality cannot be attacked by human opinion. Only human consciousness believing itself separate from God can feel threatened by spiritual teaching and attack it. The attack reveals the attacker's consciousness level and fear, not truth about spiritual principle or your path. Joel practiced this constantly throughout his ministry. His revolutionary teachings were attacked viciously by traditional religion claiming he was heretical, by materialists insisting he was delusional, by other spiritual teachers feeling competitive. He never defended himself. He never attacked back. He recognized each attack as human consciousness operating at that level, and continued teaching calmly from established spiritual consciousness. The final advanced scenario is collective attack. When groups turn against you, when social media mobs form, when entire communities reject you. This tests impersonalization at the deepest possible level because the sheer overwhelming volume of attack feels crushing and the total isolation feels unbearable. Joel taught that collective attack is still impersonal consciousness, just expressed through multiple channels simultaneously. A million people operating from the same consciousness level doesn't make that consciousness true or powerful. It remains human belief, regardless of how many humans believe it simultaneously. Your work stays exactly the same. Impersonalize, establish one power, witness, and bless. In these intense scenarios, practical action becomes especially crucial. You might need to step completely away from social media, leave communities, reduce public exposure while you stabilize your consciousness in truth. Impersonalization doesn't mean subjecting yourself to ongoing assault. It means not carrying the poison internally while you take wise protective action externally. We've journeyed together from complete misunderstanding of eye for an eye to profound spiritual truth that can revolutionize your entire life. You now understand with clarity that this wasn't a revenge doctrine but a consciousness principle describing spiritual law. You receive back into your experience the exact consciousness you hold within yourself. Attack consciousness experiences attack. Immune consciousness experiences protection. You've learned Joel Goldsmith's specific techniques in detail. Immediate recognition of all attacks as impersonal consciousness, absolute refusal to absorb poison, establishing spiritual truth firmly, practicing one power principle, developing witness consciousness, and blessing attackers. You've seen real transformation stories proving beyond doubt these principles work consistently when practiced faithfully according to Joel's instructions. You understand the challenges you'll inevitably face and exactly how to overcome them through commitment. You know this isn't passive acceptance of abuse but empowered response from spiritual consciousness rather than wounded ego. You recognize that your only work is maintaining your consciousness at truth level, regardless of external circumstances, that consciousness will eventually transform. The teaching hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years is now fully revealed to you. Eye for an eye describes the perfect law of consciousness mirroring itself. Tooth for a tooth describes receiving exactly what you project from within. When you understand this completely, you gain power over your experience that nothing external can ever take from you, and you become truly free. If your understanding of this ancient teaching has been completely transformed by Joel Goldsmith's revelation, like this video so more people discover this life-changing wisdom, subscribe for more consciousness principles that create real transformation, and comment, "I am spiritually immune," to declare your commitment to living from this new consciousness level.